6:04. Marquette Township Board Work Session, Wednesday, April 11th, 2018. And we're going to talk about policy governance. We have no public comment. We're going to look at March and April policy manual and the spreadsheet and the calendar. And Randy has provided us with kind of a catch-up.
Yeah, at your April 3rd meeting, at the end of the meeting, there was a discussion. It wasn't necessarily a request, but there was a discussion about including policies 2.3, 2.5, 2.7, 2.8, and 2.9 in this discussion. So I did a monitoring report on those as they currently exist in our current structure and our current policies.
Yeah, this is perfect.
That's just information for you.
And I did have some notes. I was going to look for them. Yeah, there we go. On some of your comments. Asset protection, is that where we're starting? Compensation and benefits, okay. Okay, so you didn't cover all of them because you had already done 2.6 before.
We did 2.6 previously, but those were the ones that were identified at the meeting on the 3rd.
Okay. And the only thing I was going to add, excuse me, is in 2.6, your comment about operating without risk management. It says policies and equipment addressing supplemental power generation will be explored. So I didn't know if we wanted to put that on a future agenda. I don't know if...
You're going to see it as a capital request for the 19 budget.
Okay. Perfect. Then we won't worry, because I know we've talked about the generators and stuff. Okay, I'll set that aside then. So, 5 is on there. So we might as well do them in order. 2.3, compensation and benefits. We had a chance to kind of glance over the manager's comments. I didn't see anything that was...
I just got this just now, right?
Yeah, I just passed them out.
Okay, this isn't... Okay. And let me remind you, too, that one of the reasons we're here is because we're reviewing the policies we have in place and justifying their existence or not, or adding new ones, or getting rid of these. And I was going to catch Randy before the meeting and ask him, the staff is asking for a policy, and I didn't know if you want to make that part of this discussion or have it on an agenda item, or...
Either way.
Well, let's go through these first. Do you want to step us through, Randy, and...
Oh, sure, we can do that. Put all this stuff back. Excuse me. What I've been doing with these monitoring reports basically is going through our existing policy structure and identifying whether or not, or trying to identify whether or not there is either already adequate protection to address those policy concerns that the board has adopted, or if we're in the process of doing that, or if it needs to be done, basically, so we can kind of schedule, the board can put together a calendar of timelines that you'd like to see things done. One of the items that Supervisor Durant just mentioned is something that we've talked about probably for the last 2 years, I think, at the board level, mainly through budget process, is a security type of a policy. Because there really is no security in any of our facilities, in terms of protecting the reception area and basically being responsive to things that are happening around the country. This room is not protected at all except for some face brick out here. It's all glass and drywall. So, the question is, what, if anything, if there's a desire on the part of the board to address security or safety issues against outside threats, basically, that might be coming in, whether it's an active shooter, whether it's a drive-by type situation, or just somebody gets off the bus at Marquette and comes down here and wants to cause some mayhem. So there really is no policy in place, and that's what Supervisor Durant was talking about. We've had a request from one of the bargaining units, in fact, informally from both bargaining units, but specifically from one, to allow township staff that are trained and licensed for carrying a sidearm to carry a sidearm. Right now we have a policy that prohibits that on all township properties. So that's what she was referring to, and that's going to be a discussion item coming up. It's an expensive item, if you try to secure or make safer this particular facility. I did bring that up when this building was being designed, and the cost was not deemed to have been worth the cost of doing that, putting some kind of a different glass and things like that into the building. But it's becoming more and more of a concern, obviously, as we keep seeing all of these events occurring in courthouses and schools and every place else. We're a target possibly for somebody who is irate. So that was the suggestion on that policy that is not included in this because we don't currently have one. So what I've done is on board policy 2.3, as you look at that, I've got the policy statement that has been adopted by the board, and then I take each of the sections of 2.3 and identify how we currently, first of all, if we currently address it, and then secondly, how we currently address it, basically to give you background information on whether or not you feel that further action on these policies or sections is necessary. So on the first one, dealing with the manager shall not, number one, 2.3.1, changes his or her compensation package. Well, I have no control over that as the manager. It's strictly board. The board has a written contract with me that lays out the criteria, and the board is the only one that can change that. So, I have to, at the end of my contract here now next year, I will have to notice you as to whether or not I want to reopen the contract. And you can do the same. I mean, if you don't respond to it within a fixed period of time, then I presume that the contract's not going to be renewed. So, I mean, that's already in the contract. With 2.3.2, promise or imply permanent or guaranteed employment, the very first item in our policy manual is printed there, and it basically says everybody here is at will. There is no guarantee of continued employment. You then have additional policies throughout the policy manual that talk about progression, posting and bidding. You have the ability to determine the size of the employees, the size of the staff, the size and type of work that they do, and you can change that at any time. So there are a number of different provisos in the existing policy manual that establish and confirm that there is no guarantee of continued employment. It's strictly at the discretion of the board. 2.3.3, establish current compensation and benefits which deviate materially from the established classification compensation system of the township. I only listed here because the classification and compensation policy is about 4 pages long. It addresses all kinds of things with job descriptions and how you move through the system and creation of new jobs, alterations of jobs, things such as that. But the overriding comment is that paragraph that I put on here, that we do have a formalized system, that we adhere to that formalized system, and there are no exceptions to that system. And then it goes on, from there in very great detail in terms of if I'm a staff member and I think my job's not being adequately reflected in my job description, I fill out a form requesting a review. We sit down, we go through the review process. I then take it as the manager and apply it to the point factoring system to see if there's any change, validate what's being said or invalidate what's being said, and basically follow the process within our system. So it's a pretty good working system.
Has that ever been done?
Several times, yes. Sometimes we agreed with the change and made it, other times we didn't. So it's very specific about what has changed in your job that makes it either more responsible. Greater work is not one of the issues. I have to work more hours, that's not one. That's a staffing question, that's not a job question. So if there's more work than one person can do, then we need to be coming to you to talk to you in the budget process about increasing staff. If it's just a matter of additional duties that are very much the same, typically what it is it's a clerical question, a clerical position who comes in and says, I now have to do this, this, and this, and the question then is, how is that different from what you're already doing? Well, it takes me longer to do it. That's not a classification question, that's a staffing question. And then there are other times when there are very legitimate things that occur. Somebody picks up an additional certification that is beneficial to the township. Not just if I just go and get some other certification, that doesn't mean there's going to be a change. It has to be something beneficial to the township that has been recognized and that you've been allowed to go get that certification. You know, as a, for instance, fire department, firefighter goes and gets an EMT certification. That's to our benefit. And that is something then that could affect their placement in the system. If they go and get a I don't know, certification for a different piece of equipment that we don't have, that doesn't benefit us. So that would not be something that would trigger that kind of a review. Just kind of, those are real loose examples.
And does it make a difference if we pay or not for them to go? That's not going to make a difference.
Well, it does if they get the certification. You know, as a for instance, what happened here is when we got to the point of population and SEV value that required a higher level of assessor than what we currently had, we had to make a choice. We either went out and hired one, or we took internal and trained. And at that point, it was more costly for us to go out and hire a level 3 than it was to upgrade one of our existing staff. So we provided the training. And then when that training was finished and we got certification of the award of the level certification, then that changed the job because it was a higher level of responsibility.
When we do that, do we have any kind of agreement that if we go through the trouble and we pay for it, are there any agreement that they'll stay X amount of years after that, or?
Depends on what the position is, but yes.
And then if they leave before that, then we want some of the money back?
Oh, yeah, and an example of that was just recently when we had two, when we bought the ambulance, basically. We made the offer to staff that if somebody who was not currently an EMT wanted to get that upgraded training, we would assist with that, provided they stayed with us for a fixed period of time. And at that time, it was 12 months, say for a year, because that's and I don't mean this to sound demeaning, but it's more of a technical type of an improvement than a professional type of an improvement. Now, if they were going to go to become fire marshal, as a for instance, and they were taking those courses, then absolutely, that's a different situation.
Good example was Darcy when she went upgraded to level 3 and that. We paid for that, but that was a couple of years ago. But that's just an example of what if she came in a year after she left, something like that.
She'd have had to reimburse us for the training that we funded. And basically, we didn't pay for training, but what we did is we covered travel.
But I mean, situations like that.
Yeah. And again, it depends on whether it's beneficial, whether it's in the township's interest to have that happen. Then there's a value to it. If it's not in our interest for that to happen, then you can get all kinds of certifications. Excuse me, 2.3.4 dealt basically with equality. We're not going to favor one employee over another for a different kind of a benefit or things such as that. And I've listed primarily the main policy is equal employment policy, which basically says in all respects, whether it's job placement, whether it's progression on the various plans or the provision of benefits, everybody's equal. Nobody is going to be treated special. And then we have several after that. There are a number of other policies that just dovetail off of that. Excuse me. And that was pretty much that policy, that section on compensation and benefits. On the next one, which was 2.5, which is financial condition and activities, this one's a little bit more varied than that, because many of these issues with finance do not reside within policy manual. They reside within statute, and they reside within financial audit guidelines and GASB, Governmental Accounting and Standards Board. So I've addressed on these where we do have policies, 2.51, 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 basically are covered by essentially two documents that you currently have. One is in your budget process, every year you adopt a budget resolution and appropriations act. That establishes criteria for me as the manager, as the financial manager, the administrative manager, and the clerk as the financial manager. So that separates the two of us out basically, and then it's under the clerk statute, working in conjunction with the treasurer statute to address financial issues, fund operations, fund maintenance, fund investments, those kinds of things. So it's a little bit convoluted. 2.5.4, settle payroll and debts in a timely manner, we do have, that does fall under the policy manual as well as the clerk and the treasurer statutes. But we have a very defined payroll procedure policy in the policy manual, and that's what's referenced here. Provides what the pay periods are, when you have to turn your timesheets in, when you get paid, what happens if a check doesn't get cashed, you know, those kinds of things are all covered by a policy. 2.5.5, allow tax payments or other government-ordered payments. We don't have a specific policy on that because that's governed by statute. So, but again, you know, if the board wants to develop a policy that specifies that, that is a policy that would have to be developed.
Still have to fall in line with state requirements anyway.
Absolutely, yeah, it
Wouldn't be
would.
able to supersede anything.
No, you couldn't supersede anything, but what you could do, and in some respects you already have it, because in my job description, there's a provision that says I'm obligated to enforce any decision that's in benefit of the township. So, I mean, that would be taxes, that would be anything else, you know, like that. But again, the actual statutory authority falls with the clerk and the treasurer.
There's been some confusion, I think, over the years with people pointing the finger at you, saying that you are responsible for things that you're really not financially.
Sure.
That it does fall primarily to the clerk, and then, you know, you're the
Lightning rod,
the hands, yeah, but
Yeah.
you're the hands of actually implementing stuff,
yeah.
other than the budget, and that can get kind of confusing, and then.
Well,
treasurer-
there's a perception that township manager is the same as a city manager, and they're not the same.
Right, yes.
They're not the same. City manager by charter is vested with overall financial authority. So whatever the city treasurer does is under the auspices of the city manager. It's not the case in township government. Township manager only exists in township government if the supervisor appoints one. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. And that's a delegation of supervisor's authority in some respects, and typically it's personnel related.
Are you responsible for them to make sure that the thing is done right?
What's that?
The clerk or the treasurer?
No, that's not under my oversight. That's statutory, and that's, you know, the board. The board can delegate, the board by action, specific action, can delegate to me certain things, but it can't delegate to me any statutory authorities. Township manager cannot have statutory authority. That's a superintendent. Superintendent has statutory authority. It's just a different structure of township
So
government.
the title manager, does that cover our situation here as of today? It might have worked before, but as today, as we're moving ahead, is that the title manager, is that working for us, or will it work?
It does in the structure, excuse me, it does in the structure that you have. As a for instance, when Dennis left here, he took a position as superintendent in Grand Blanc Township. So what happened there is that township governing body, that board, gave up some of their authorities, and they fell to the superintendent that they appointed, and that superintendent has very specifically designated statutory authorities under the Charter Township Act. Those are authorities that I don't have. He can commit the board. I can't.
So if you want the clerk or the treasurer to do something, and they don't do it the same way, you can't correct them for that.
No, that's not within my authority. What,
That's what I'm saying.
But
Is that authority
if the-
enough to correct us in the
if,
future?
if the board, I guess an example would be if the board passes an action that requires a resolution to be created and filed with the state. And the clerk doesn't do it. He's sitting there listening. The clerk doesn't do it, and I know that he didn't do it, then my obligation is to inform the supervisor that it wasn't done. But I have no authority over the clerk. That was just an example. It's an easy example. Let's see, then, oh, I'm sorry.
The bottom line is, the township is a creature of the state legislature. It's always that.
It is.
It always reverts to that in all the laws.
Mhm. It is. And basically what the board does is the board delegates authorities to the township manager through the job description and then through actions that the board takes on policy matters.
That's why I've been pushing these so much, to make sure that we are doing what we feel we should be doing, you know,
Or
because.
what we could read we should be doing,
Yeah.
because it's there.
Yeah.
It's there to be read.
It is, and this township operates substantially differently than any other township in the Upper Peninsula because we do strive to follow statutory guidelines, and that's not necessarily the case in all the other townships, as those of you who have been to the MTA conferences know. You know, some of the things that come out there, it's amazing because it's pure statutory violations and it's like everyday business. But, you know, so those things happen. The next one, however, 2.5.6, is delegated to me in my job description, and that is that it's my responsibility that when issues occur, that I take action without having to wait for the board to consider it and go forward, particularly in emergency situations. And, you know, and if I fail to do that, that rests with me, because in the emergency operations plan, the township manager is designated as the initial contact behind the supervisor. Supervisor is the initial contact, manager is the second, and then I have the responsibility of mobilizing whatever township forces there are to mitigate that circumstance. So that one, we don't have necessarily a policy, but what we have is my job description, and then we have our emergency operating plan, which is different than a policy. And that involves the fire chief, it involves the superintendent of public works, it involves the planning and zoning administrator, either through a making sure that there's water available. The planner and zoning administrator is the communications person that keeps the communication channels going. Fire chief is the emergency services, coordinating police, fire, those type of things. And my role is to make sure all of those things are happening.
Where's that document? Do we have that?
That's, yeah, it sits on the fire chief's, you have one somewhere in the stuff that Dennis gave you. It's a red binder. I've got it on my bookshelf. Fire chief has it on his bookshelf. It's called the Emergency Operations Plan, and Dennis may have left it somewhere else. I mean, it could be in the vault, but I've got one on mine. If you look on my bookshelf in the office, it's the fat red manual that says Emergency Operations Plan right on it.
Okay, I'll check
There was
that.
one on the shelf behind Andra at one time.
There is one there because that, if you'll recall, the reason we went with the generator we went with at the fire department is because we designated that as an alternate command center. The command center right now is at the state police post, but if that gets taken out of commission somehow, then our fire department becomes the emergency operations center.
I think a good example would probably be the flood that we had
Absolutely.
15 years
It's a
ago, or
great
whenever that
example.
was. That was all set up, that was all, it worked flawless, it really did.
Yeah.
The command center and all the steps all the way down to evacuating people, the whole thing went down.
And we did have
Perfect.
300 township residents that were in the potential flood zone had the McClure Dam failed. Pete's one of them.
When my wife got all excited about the garage, I said, open the garage door. Our neighbors will sort out our stuff.
Should have just put a second floor on the garage. So anyway, so that is covered, not by policy, but by job description and by emergency operations plan. 2.5.7, single unbudgeted purchase, again, that's our procurement policy. That's covered well in the procurement policy that's already in place. But again, that's not a personnel policy, that's a board policy. Failed to aggressively pursue receivables after a reasonable grace period. That's again, in my job description, as an item in the job description, it says my responsibility is to pursue whatever's determined in the township's favor.
How does that tie
But
into?
it's not a policy.
How does it tie into Ernie's responsibility for collecting back taxes? Do you work together then, or is he solely responsible for that?
That falls directly under the treasurer as a statute. But if the treasurer is not getting response, I can have the sheriff's department pursue it and issue them a citation.
I hate to say this, but at the end of this month, I think we have three
I think there's 3 left.
left that we may have to do something with, and I have gone over to places and talked to the people, and they don't like it a bit.
No, they don't.
So these 3 people know. Have you visited all 3 of them?
No, they've got 3 letters, and this is the final one, and the next time will be from the attorney with a very short period, and then
Correct.
I and our deputy will take a visit to them.
And the county then steps in as well. The county treasurer gets involved in foreclosures.
Yeah, I was gonna say that
Yeah.
involves actually
But-
shutting them down.
But you do have, and it surprises me that we only have 3. It really does, because there are getting to be more and more and more people that play the reclaim game.
Yeah.
They let it go, let it go, let it go until the sheriff's department issues the notice of public sale, and then they'll come in at the last minute and pay their taxes and be done.
This
But
is
actually, even after it's sold, they've got a year to pay their taxes and take it back.
We're talking about 2 different things. I'm talking about
Yep.
personal property
Yep.
tax.
You're talking
The
personal.
other one is our property tax we have.
Yep.
So the personal property tax that the business have to pay extra on their personal property within their business and that. I have 3 of them sitting out there right now. The rest of them
Yeah.
all through the county right now.
Yeah.
Once we turn over the county, they pretty well take care of all of it.
They do, and, and basically, the people are then responsible to make it right with the county, not with us. And like I said, the sheriff basically stands up on the courthouse steps and basically says, these properties are foreclosed, and, and then you've got a year, the current owner's got a year to come in and pay up the taxes.
They're allowed to be open while this happens.
Oh, yeah.
right? Obviously, they
But
can.
this is also
Yep.
your home
Yeah,
taxes
could be
too.
home taxes as well, but you're still in your home. The bank will likely foreclose before anything else happens, but there are provisions to deal with that, but again, they're statutory provisions.
Ernie, you made a comment just a minute ago that you go over and you have talked to people. Do you think that's wise for you to go over there alone? and talk
Probably
to
not.
these? don't
I
think
won't
so.
do it again.
No.
Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
I would say a
It's,
phone call or a letter, but if
And
you.
we did that. I did that already.
Then the next step would be have a sheriff's department go with you. Because today,
Actually, what the next
It's
step would
today.
be, to have the sheriff's deputy take the final notice and deliver it. It makes a big difference if somebody with a badge delivers it versus the local treasurer. No offense, but I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean.
well, today, the way it is.
You
out
never
there.
know. Well, the bigger concern that I have, and it's the reason that I don't allow either our service workers or our assessors to go by themselves, is you don't know if you're walking into a meth lab, and then you're potentially contaminated. I mean, once that happens, we have a fairly large medical bill. They have to go be tested, they have to be checked, they have to be observed, and they're not at work. So, that's one of the reasons that we see 2 people, for the most part in a lot of places. I just won't, particularly 2 females, I won't have them go to some places by themselves. Just won't allow it. And that's what generated the question about safety and security. Both of our females are concealed permit holders, so, they could technically, but not in a township vehicle and not on township property.
So actually, really, when I send that final letter to them and they don't do anything, the next step is
I'd have our sheriff's deputy deliver it.
step after that is that with the sheriff deputy and after I consult with our attorney to go in and shut it down.
Mhm.
They cannot take anything out of there except their clothing.
That's it. Even on a water shutoff, we have 2 service workers go, when they're going for a water shut-off, because you just never know. You just don't know. I mean, growing marijuana takes a lot of water.
Water and electricity.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know what you're walking into. I mean, the most recent example was right there on Fair Avenue, just down the street from you. I
Yeah.
mean, 2 guys rented a house and destroyed it. The house is uninhabitable.
Actually, it was the kids that
Yeah,
destroyed
2
it.
of them, yeah.
Okay,
2.5.9, failed to maintain adequate level of cash flow. Obviously, we've got clerk, treasurer, Lois in finance, and Dulcie all tracking that. And then again, that's covered by the Budget Resolution and Appropriations Act, and then statutory responsibilities. Now, I did attach to this a copy of the Appropriations Act. So that's what you adopt every year with the budget, that establishes the parameters, who's the chief administrative officer, who's the chief fiscal officer, those kinds of things. That's the document that I'm referring to, and you do that every year. Deals with reports, transfer of authority, appropriations, adoption of the budget by cost center, monitoring, and what happens if there's a violation. So that takes us 2.7, which is ends focus of grants and contracts. This is kind of a new one that came out of policy governance. We don't necessarily have a policy that specifically covers this. The policy statement is township management team may not enter into any grants or contract agreements that fails to emphasize primarily the production of ends and secondarily the avoidance of unacceptable means. First of all, none of us have individual contracting authority. Any contract or any grant, as you well know, has to come before the board for approval ahead of time, and then it has to come back to the board for authorization to sign. So that's our operating guidelines. So there is not a specific policy in that regard from the standpoint of personnel policy. There is a board policy that requires that process. And also statute. Statute limits who can enter contracts.
John?
The next time we print section 7, under township board, could you put a 4 after that?
4?
Where are you talking about?
Section 7. You gotta go back.
2.7?
Which one are you?
Oh, okay. Further board for consider. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
The last, at the end of that sentence, right here. Further board consideration, or for further board consideration.
And at,
Another 4.
you're listing the salaries on page 2.
Oh, okay, you're talking about the budget resolution?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Parentheses 4, so. I think there's 4 board members, right?
I'm trying to distinguish that there's 4 board members.
Oh, okay. What, are we talking about the Appropriations Act? Oh, down there, okay. Where are we looking?
Well, the township board that's the whole township board. The clerk and the treasurer are addressed also, but
Oh, I see, okay, that's where you're talking about, okay. So,
It doesn't say trustees, is that what you're thinking? That it just applies to the trustees?
well, that is the township board budget.
Budget.
that's our
Line item.
budget.
But the salary for the clerk and the treasurer are listed in their individual budget lines. So,
Yeah, these are budget amounts.
okay, I think what trustee Marks is saying is that the treasurer and the clerk are also identified further down in it. So the 28,649, it's convoluted because that 28,649 includes people that work for the board, like your attorney and, and things like that, the portion of it, because that's not broken out in the treasurer. What's broken out is the salary and the fringe benefits for the treasurer and the
I
clerk.
think it needs a little cleanup, frankly.
Buck,
Oh, sure.
What we could
Got one
put,
of those.
what we could put there is we could put township board general,
That's okay.
or trustees in general. I mean, it's however you want to see that. I know what you're saying is that it gives the impression, it gives the wrong impression.
Yeah,
but you
Okay.
have to know what you're looking, you have to understand this too.
Yeah. You could just put 4 members.
This is
After township
expenditures
board.
by these departments.
But it also includes other expenditures. So
Yeah.
it's not just the board member. That, if it just said 4, then somebody would divide 28,649 by 4 and say, my God, you guys get paid too much. You know? So I think this is by activity.
I don't have an answer, I
Yeah.
just thought it needs a little cleanup.
Okay. So that took us, let's see, we were talking about 2.7 at that point, and, and if the board wants to develop a personnel policy to that effect, we could, but it would have to pull in statutory authorities, accepting statutory authorities of elected officials. So there is not currently a policy.
I think it's fine the way it is now because, again, no one has the authority to make any contracts. It has to come before the board where it should come, so.
Yeah, I
Right.
think that's right.
2.8, emergency township manager succession, we're in the process right now. There's not a policy on it. It's difficult because it's going to be rare that you're going to have somebody in-house that's going to be able to move up to that position because of the small number of staff that we have. But there needs to be a plan, basically, of what happens if there isn't. How do you fulfill that posture? Statutorily, what happens is if I get run over by a Mark-Tran walking out of here, everything that I do reverts back to the township supervisor. That's the immediate succession plan. But what happens after that? Because obviously, she's got her business to run, and and is not going to be able to deal with all of the day-to-day things, 8 hours a day that happen. So we are in the process of developing a kind of a multifaceted. What do you do for the first 30 days? What do you do for the next 30 days? And at what point then do you finish your recruitment process and make decisions on what to do? Do you have people in the wings that you could contact as an interim? Those kinds of things. So that we're building that currently.
When will we see that, roughly?
Probably, I'm hoping by the time we get into budget. I have amassed some materials from other sources in terms of, what considerations there are for succession planning. There's 2 different aspects. There's succession planning, where you've actually got a plan, and you're bringing Susie Jones or Bill Smith, you're working them through the process to get them up to speed. And that could include having somebody designated to be going through the MTA process, their what do they call it, their development process. I can't remember, I'm drawing a blank on.
Township Governance Academy.
Governance Academy, Township Governance Academy, that basically brings somebody to the point of being able to step up into that position. Typically, you have multiples in that role. Our issue is that we have individuals kind of closeted. You've got superintendent of public works, you've got planning and zoning administrator, fire chief, but not a general. There's no assistant township manager, or anything like that. So you've got that. You've got succession planning, and then you've got the emergency process. What happens if, let's say you've got a plan in place and you've got somebody who's just starting and something happens to the manager? What do you do then? Do you go to a former manager and bring them back for 6 months? Do you go to somebody in the community that you know of that,
Who's been one,
that,
retired and
well, or
been-
that has the background, has been in city management or county management or whatever, that could come in and, while you're doing your deciding process and how you're gonna fill the position, or if you're gonna fill the position. I mean, you don't have to have a township manager. So, I mean, those are the things that we're gonna try and build into this plan, basically.
Don't ignore that sometimes a deputy can be a role.
Mm-hmm, sure.
That takes care of a secession or an
Yep.
absence.
You can, that's true.
So, and just like the supervisor can have a deputy supervisor.
True.
They don't get paid, but they're there.
Well, and the other thing,
You can have that for a manager or anyone else.
you can, and in a community like this, we're a little bit unique in communities because we've got large institutions right here in town. You've got the university, you've got a large medical facility, you've got, people don't want to leave here after they leave another job. So you've got the Steve Lauries of the world sitting out there who could come in to be superintendent of public works overnight, on a short-term basis. You've got a couple of other people around that have been community managers of some sort, either a city manager or have history as a village or township manager that could come in on a short-term basis just to keep the ship going. And or you could just simply say, got hit by a bus last night, I'm the supervisor, I can't do the whole thing, so superintendent of public works, planning and zoning administrator, fire chief, you three are now a management team. And I want you to operate on a daily basis until I decide what I'm gonna do for the manager's position. So I mean, that's a potential as well. You've got three individuals then that have background, that have history, that bring in planning, zoning, fire, emergency services, all of those things, all in a team, basically. So that's an option. So there are a number of different ways you can address that on a short-term basis. So at any event, there hopefully by the time we get into the budget cycle, which is probably going to be early July, I mean, really doing a lot of work, because it'll be the June 30th figures is what we'll use for the final budget recommendation. May have a draft of something for you to take a look at. 2.9, collaboration with other entities. We try this all the time. The key here is you have to have a willing partner, and so far we have not had a willing partner in any of the things that we've tried to do. Certainly, I think the job descriptions all reflect that not just the manager, but the planning and zoning administrator, the public works superintendent, the job descriptions reflect cooperation in working with neighboring entities that provide the same kind of services. I mean, and they do that all the time. We collaborate with county planning all the time, city planning a lot of times with Dennis Stakowitz. Fire is constantly
Fire, sewer,
coordinating.
water.
Well, fire is currently coordinating with Ian, the chief of the city fire department, because we have mutual aid agreements, and all of the other townships and things such as that. So although there's not a policy, we have an operating structure where we do that. I mean, I meet with Mike Angeli a lot about, what do we do about the people standing out here holding hungry signs, and what do we do about the warming center on Washington Street, and what do we do about the churches that want to relocate in our communities that want to provide those kinds of services. How do we deal with some of those things? So we have those conversations fairly often, so we kind of know what the other one's thinking and what direction they're kind of going in. But then again, both of us within the next
Few years.
however many years are not going to be in position doing that. So that there needs to be, and the previous manager you just couldn't cooperate with. I mean, you just couldn't do it. You couldn't trust him. You just couldn't. And those are the kinds of things that impact this that you really can't policy direct or policy drive. It's inherent in our jobs that we're not in a vacuum and we don't operate independently. We're in a larger community, and we do try to coordinate. We have a managers meeting quarterly where all the managers get together and talk about issues like health insurance and things like that. It would be nice if we had a stronger presence from our county government, but we don't. So we do it on our own.
That's good, though.
But there is not a policy in place to address that.
I think that'll be kind of difficult to put in place, too.
Well, it would be, and, like I say, each of our job descriptions has a provision in the job description that says we are responsible, basically, to reach out and work with our neighbors, basically. That's what we do. That's part of our job. And this community, this township, for all the years that I've been here, the boards have always taken a position that we are focused on regionality. We are not focused on just Marquette Township. And the things that we try to do are intended to benefit the region, not just us. But that's not the philosophy everywhere.
And I think the relationship with the city is getting better than it has been in the past. A lot better.
It is, and again, I mentioned earlier in this session, city manager is different than township manager. City manager had more sway to commit the city into things than what the township manager does, and had his own agenda, and that was not to benefit anybody but the city. So, it's hard to work with someone like that in a cooperative role. And Water Authority, Recreation Authority, several of those things that we were very serious about and still are very serious about, only were going to happen if we assumed responsibility for all of the cash cows that the city had. Marina, Lakeview Arena, all of their parks. And they wanted to maintain ownership of all of it. So we were just going to help them pay for it. That was their theory. And I understand that, because if I was a city manager, this probably would be my position.
Right.
Absolutely. But it is what it is, and you're kind of a hostage to the environmental personality, I guess.
Yeah.
So where we can, we do, and we have been successful in some. Like the Iron Ore Heritage Trail was one, because everybody had a standing to gain from that, and some more than others, but all of the others said, yeah, okay, even though we don't have the big bang for it, we think it's a great idea. So that's what I passed to you for information or chewing on.
Good information. So if you want to read over this and see if there's anything you think we need to discuss, we can do it at board meeting. We have the policy section, let me know, and we can add it on. Otherwise, we might just touch on some of this dependently, as they follow the calendar. Our next one is for April is going to be the 2.5 again, and we kind of did touch on that a little bit with the DWRF discussion at our last meeting, and we are going to talk about it in a work session next month. So I don't know if you want to. 2.5, Randy, is kind of light if you want to kind of look at that.
The financial condition?
Yeah, not much that, kind of nice having it in your format there. We're pretty much doing all of this stuff, so I don't know that we.
Well, and, and the financial side of it is we are, as a charter township, we are probably more heavily regulated than cities are. Because cities have flexibility within their charter to basically run their own business. We really don't. We're really restricted. I mean, we're capped at 5 mills. The residents can only approve another 5 mills, up to 10 mills for operations. The city starts off at, I think, 17.5 mills, and they can go up to 25 without a vote of the public. They operate their own roads. They get the Act 51 monies, so they operate in a totally different environment. So from the standpoint of a policy on financial condition, I think we're pretty well regulated by the Charter Township Act and by the Michigan Constitution, because really a township only has those authorities that can reasonably be construed from the Constitution. And it's not literally construed, it's reasonably construed. And there are many, many court cases that define that and shrink that down. So from the standpoint of even doing things like saying, absolutely, sure, we'll spend $250,000 for the roundabout lighting for MDOT. And no, we can't take the residents' money and do that. That's why we went looking for grants, or it was gonna be the DDA levying a millage. You know, so we're much more fiscally constrained and more responsible to comply with regulation than what some other government entities are. So I think our policies, basically, I think our policy simply says we will comply with constitutional requirements and generally accepted accounting principles subject to audit. I mean, that's pretty much our policy.
That's why I mentioned before, on numerous occasions, to remind everybody, not just the board, but that we are trustees of the money that is given to us for the benefit of the community. And when we have discussions about the Solid Waste Authority as an example, and say that we don't agree with how that's being managed or run or organized or whatever, that's part of our responsibility. And I tell my staff the same thing. Question everything. You must question everything. That doesn't mean ask a lot of questions, but that could be part of it. But you need to say, why?
In reality, you can only spend money on things that benefit the residents of the community. You can't, I mean, you can't even have a recognition dinner for your firefighters, because that doesn't benefit the community, although it's been argued, and in some cases it's been argued successfully, that morale is an impactor over the level of service that the residents receive, as long as the function has an educational component or a training component. So I mean, and that's, you know, so you're restricted on that. I mean, it's the city does the police and fire ball, I mean, you know, as a fundraiser. Okay, you can't do that as a township. You're financially restricted in how you spend your township dollars, because specifically you're limited to 5 mills operating, and you have to benefit your residents with that 5 mills.
Well, they must have had a problem a couple of years ago, not only here, but they had to get a ruling on if you could feed the election people.
That was a recent ruling.
Yeah.
That was just within the last 2 to 3 years,
Yeah.
Yeah, because the question was, is that really beneficial to the residents,
Right.
whether they're hungry or not? You know, I mean, what's the argument? But that's where we're a little bit different, and it's going to be interesting, because I have, I'm going to be talking to the state and local government class at Northern on the 18th about township government and local government. Brian Cherry asked me to come in and talk to him about township versus city, village, county, state, that kind of stuff. So we'll be talking about some of those things, but people don't understand it and they don't recognize it. Even, you know, our own residents saying, "Why can't you do this?" Well, because statutorily we don't have the authority. We simply don't.
There's a lot of people out there that are heading up organizations that don't understand that either. Give you an example. In last night's Mining Journal, it quoted Amy Klickner talking to one of the townships who said they can't afford to give her $5,000.
That was City of Ishpeming.
City of Ishpeming board, yeah,
He wasn't trying to say that or anything.
And what did she say?
you know.
You should just raise your
Yeah.
more money here in
Her,
the community.
it was an indication that she doesn't understand very much about municipal government, because that was her comment. Her comment was, what we do is economic development. Economic development is good for you, so you should fund us, basically.
Okay.
Give us your money and raise
And
taxes
if
to the residents
If you
if
don't
you
have
to.
it, raise
Yeah.
your taxes.
Yeah, that's
She said-
exactly
I
right.
couldn't believe anybody would say that in a public meeting.
Yeah, well, that's only people that don't understand the group that they're talking to, you know, and what their restrictions are.
Well, we've had that discussion at this level and different boards that I've been involved with too, on the supportive idea. Even different organizations supporting things that turn out to be infrastructure, whether they're going to help with road maintenance, even though they're not ours, or the tunnel or something. And I get that. You have to have that separation between what you're doing, and maybe that's the whole thing it has to come down to, is for the residents, not necessarily for the betterment of the county.
That's right. Yeah, and Dennis was kind of an albatross around the Lake Superior Community Partnership's neck, because they would continue, every year they would come to the board and, and want a contribution from the township. And we've really never belonged to the partnership, because the first question that Dennis always asked was, what will you do for Marquette Township? And the answer was always, well, we do marketing for this, that, and this. I'm not asking about that. What will you do for Marquette Township? I cannot spend township taxpayers' money unless the township taxpayers have a benefit. What is it? Well, anybody who does this and it increases traffic, and he said, that costs me money, increasing traffic. And they would turn around and leave. And then they just quit coming, because they cannot demonstrate a benefit to Marquette Township, although they take credit for every job that comes out of Marquette Township.
At every opening.
And they're at every opening. They have really nothing to do with that other than maybe answering a question on the telephone. But we show up in their reports all the time when it was in that paper. What did they say? It was in that newspaper article. It was something like they impacted over 600 jobs in Ishpeming.
Yeah.
There aren't 600 jobs in Ishpeming.
There's 600 people.
But that's the theory that they take. Everything we
I
do,
don't really know.
everything we do benefits everybody. And that's their theory, and we just don't see any of it. We don't see any of it. So we can't, by law, we cannot fund them. They're a fundraising organization that provides no benefit directly to Marquette Township that's measurable.
When
It
we
isn't.
supervisors got together, Chocolate, Marquette, and us, the first few meetings that I started after Dennis left, we spent a couple hours one night and a couple hours the next night in different months, just going through the differences between our communities and how they run, and the charters and the township laws, and we were so, even the structure of the boards and what they can and can't do, and work sessions, we spent about 4 hours just telling each other the differences between the two municipalities. It was amazing how we didn't know each other at all and how we operate.
Yeah, it's just a simple fact that the bottom line with township government is you can only do what's reasonably construed by the Constitution of the state. That's it. We're limited to that. And then with the additional limitations on millage that we can have for operating, 5 mills, that's it. That's all we can have.
Well, Lake Superior, that whole thing is, when they have a grand opening here, sometimes we don't have anybody from the township there.
They don't
take
tell
up-
us.
I know it.
We don't know
But that's
about
not,
That kind of falls to the business too. They're
that,
supposed to be dealing with us.
right, exactly,
So they need to tell us what they're doing,
yeah.
just as, because we're their mayor, their city, their
Right.
whatever, this is where they're operating. But they don't. They join the partnership and then they take over, which is up to them, that's fine.
Well, maybe the business associations have like a little chamber themselves, and then set up our own ribbon ceremony instead of.
They actually struggled with the same thing, because we had, in the beginning, we had $1 and a plaque. We went out and bought the frames and the certificate, and we would go and present them, because I did it with Frank the first few meetings when we
Right.
started it up. But the businesses weren't telling us either that they were here, and we were trying to get a hold of the township, kind of, and be more
Well, we know, but,
connected
and because
that
they have
way.
to go through the planning for any building in that, so maybe
Well,
we should
I
follow
don't
up
always
on
know
it.
when they're
Yeah, and there's
open.
also a lot of,
Event.
there's a lot of fluidity as well. We have a lot of businesses that come in and go out, and come in and go out, and come in and go out. And, and it's we do have a process where, where we issue a business license when the business comes in, and in some cases, by the time we go to present them the
over
the
with.
certificate, either that or they've moved somewhere else, they've moved to a different location. So there's a lot of fluidity right now in the township. There's a lot of question about what's going to happen with the mall. There's a lot of question about available land. There's pricing and a variety of things. But we constantly have developers coming and talking with us and looking constantly. So we're still in a position where we're a desirable location, and we're desirable because utilities are in place, and because we've got decent road structure, and progressive board, and, and we're easy to work with. I mean, we continually have developers tell us that, yeah, we can get through a process relatively quickly, in the township and get to people and be able to get our business going.
Who are we gonna have at Myers? Are you gonna be there and Randy's gonna be there, I hope? Oh, no, you?
I'll be out of commission, but.
Yeah, so Randy will be
Randy
there.
and Jason probably on Isaac.
And Ron and Rob
Yeah.
and, all of us that have worked with them will all be there. Dulcie, probably.
I've already met them and talked to them and walked through the store for the UP 200
Mhm.
check distribution, so I know quite a few of them already, John.
I have a more general question with regard to policy governance. I keep seeing a lot of references in here that there's no current policy. Isn't the fact that it's written down there in policy governance that's been adopted, doesn't that make it a policy?
If we adopted
And-
policy governance.
And we only need to define how that policy is handled?
But for the most part, when I read through this, what we don't have policies on are government
Right.
mandated.
I understand that, but if,
Are you saying we should have one
no,
saying?
no, what I'm saying is, if we have a policy in here, and the reason, and it says we don't have a policy, specific policy because it's government mandated, isn't that the details on how that policy is resolved? I mean, we still have the policy. It's right there in policy governance. We adopted that. So we have a policy. It's just a matter of defining the terms under which that policy is controlled. And if its policy is controlled by statute 1, 2, 3, then that's how it's controlled.
So you're saying it should be in there?
I'm not saying it should be in there. It should, just a reference
Okay.
to what statute or what employee handbook governs that policy, because we have the policy.
Okay, just reference it.
I mean, am I headed down the right track?
No, it makes sense.
Even if it just said C,
Correct.
And that's what
doesn't have
Randy's
to
kind
be,
of done here.
it doesn't have to limit it, or it doesn't have to be specific, it just needs to say, C, chapter, so-and-so.
Right, and the one in particular, I guess, where we refer to the policy with, well, more specific than that even, when it refers to the one about successors. I mean, and there's, but to say we don't have a policy, we actually have a policy.
Just did it.
It's right there.
Well, we do, yeah, and,
So what we need to do is we need to, the manager in this case needs to develop the details of how that,
That's what he said he's doing.
and that needs to be adopted as part of the policy, but we have the policy. What confuses me, we just keep saying we don't have a specific policy, and actually we do have a specific policy. We just don't have the details.
We have a
well,
plan.
here, let me tell you where I'm headed with this, where my theory was, and we're kind of working in that direction. What I'm doing at this point, early in the governing, the policy governance process, is the board has adopted a series of policies. And what I'm doing now is I'm going back into our history, our existing policies or procedures, to identify what we already have documentation for. And then what I intend to do is go back at some point and say, Board Policy 2.3 is compensation and benefits. And then under that title, list all of the policies that deal with compensation and benefits
Right.
in a new policy manual.
Right.
So when you go, when there's a question about, how does Johnny Smith get paid? Okay, that's compensation and benefits. So you go to that section and then you look and, okay, here's the policy on payroll. Here's the policy on classification and compensation. So that will be there. So this is just my view, but listening to the board members talking and everything, what I envisioned was a new policy manual that will encompass all of our current operating guidelines and policies under
Just
this
categorized
format.
under those
Under this format.
specific adopted board policies.
Section 1 is policy 2.3, compensation and benefits. And then under that would be payroll process, would be classification and compensation system, would be down that line. So they would all be encapsulated right there in that one policy. Would include sick time, would include holiday pay, would include all of those travel, all of the things that have to do with compensation and benefits. It would all be under that category. And then, and then you would go to, what's the next one? Well, it was broken out here separately. Financial condition and activities. Then you would have the cross-reference again. Financial activity is the payroll process, so it would be cross-referenced, see payroll process, section such and such. So we would, at the end of it, you would have a policy manual. It would be under, what are there, five different sections, basically, that would encapsulate then all of our policies that apply with that.
Well, I wanted to make sure I wasn't headed down the right trail here, because I was sure we adopted this policy.
Yeah, you've adopted this, and what I'm trying to do now is to equate what the board adopted in new terms with what we already have in place. As a, for instance, under financial conditions and activities, one of the items is, it was the one about contracts and grants, basically. We have a provision for that, and that's where that would be located. Procurement policy, for instance, would fall under that section. So it would be basically reconfiguring how the policy manual, current policy manual looks.
Under that policy, wouldn't you just say, refer them to see the procurement policy?
You could do either way, but then you have two documents
Yeah,
that you're going
be
back
nice.
and forth. What I'm considering or talking
Bring it
about is
into
bringing it into one document. So when you're looking at, how do we do grants? Or how does Jimmy John be able to spend the money? There's a procurement policy, and it's under financial conditions and activities. So you would just go there in one document. You'd have an index, basically. The index would say financial conditions and activities, procurement policy, payroll policy, so on and so forth, under that system.
No current policy exists, it's more of the details of this policy or that don't
Right.
exist.
Right. There is not an existing policy that specifically fits that description, but we have this, and this.
Okay.
And those things taken together, in my opinion, satisfy this.
So how do
So
you?
that's all, and what I'm doing with these is giving you my interpretation of what the policy is that you're now adopting and what we have in place currently that would get there. So you'll have it all in one document.
So how do you see the reference, yes, John, one sec, for the legislative side of it? Were you thinking of maybe the whole MCL or just referencing it when we have not our specific policy that adheres to it, but it would go back to the legislative side?
Well, yeah, there would be a reference to statutory authorities, in there, in the Charter Township Act, obviously, because the Charter Township Act contains all of those conditions. But there would be a statement saying that, these are the policies or the things that are under our control. Others that are not are covered by the Charter Township Act, State of Michigan, or the Constitution.
Well, that's why I was
Because you can't get everything. You're not going to be able to address everything. But if something comes up that's not currently existing in a policy, that is not also covered by a statute or by the Constitution, then you would develop a policy to address that.
As opposed to listing them in two places, as opposed to having this policy and underneath that policy having the procurement policy that currently exists written down, wouldn't it be better just to refer to that policy?
Certainly can.
So that when that changes, we don't have to change it in two places, number one, because it never usually happens, right?
That's
On
right.
time. But just to refer them to it?
Yeah, that's true. But what I'm suggesting is eliminating the existing policy manual and incorporating it with this one. So you'd only have one document, and it would
Make the
all be
changes.
right there in front of you.
Yeah, if that
and for
happened,
you guys-
so we didn't have it sitting in two places.
Right,
that'd be
and
fine with
for
that.
you guys, then, you would have it electronically as well, so you could scan, you could search it. You could just type in payroll, and poof, it would pull up these policies that impact payroll.
John?
Doing what Dave has, the point he's brought up, and what the manager is suggesting that he's working towards, has a tremendous added value. Later on, whether it's this board or any future board, wants to make a revision to any one of those documents, or wants to just make a revision offhand, it'll keep everybody aware of where else you need to go and make a revision. And it will make the suggested revision much more important to be looked at from the perspective of all of the angles that we need to. And
Well-
I think that keeps it from getting to be conflicting. I think it's a wise thing to do. I hope we can do it. And I think it's a great way to leave this a better place than we found it.
And that's why I wanted to make sure we went through these individually. So, I mean, we put these policies in place some of the times based on what we already had, but we added some to this with Susan when we were working on it. So my hope was then to go over them all this year and make sure, is this what we want to follow through with? Do we need a new policy? Do we need to take some of these out? Do we need to change them?
And what else does
So
it
we're-
impact?
Yeah, and we're hands-on with this right now, so that by the end of the year, we should feel pretty confident about it. And that's why I say if there's some that you want to talk about more, and you feel like we need to have a new policy or something, then we can bring that up at the board too. I mean, we don't have to have a work session for it.
Well, Randy's
you know-
saying that if he gets a thing that says, refer to, say, it's a subsection like that, then over here you got the policy, and Dave's saying, have the policy, so if you change it a little, you can change that one, you don't have to change the two of them. Is that what you're saying?
No, I
Well,
think they're both saying we need one document.
Same thing. I think we're both saying essentially the same
There's
thing,
some of
just
them
in
you
different
can't have
terms.
one document.
Correct.
Because some of them are state statutes, some of them
Right.
are emergency management
Management
plans.
plan.
I mean, obviously, you're not gonna put that in the policy.
No, you have to
government.
just
You
reference
just need
it.
to refer to it.
Yeah, reference it. You know, and quite frankly, there's a camouflage theory here behind what I'm suggesting is because it has happened in other places that maybe a succeeding board says, the heck with this policy governance crap, we just want a policy manual. Well, you'll still have it. I mean, they would still have it. They would just take off the headings and you got all those policies that for years you guys have been working on to establish and it's still there. But, I mean, that's just a happenstance kind of thing. But I think you do need to get down to a single document that addresses all of your policies. So when a question comes up, you can easily search, scan it, search, find the answer and answer the question. So,
And I guess what I want to more specific on it is Board Policy 2.8, Emergency Township Manager Succession. We don't have
no,
a succession lined up.
no.
It would be my understanding that it is up to the manager to put together his thoughts on the successor.
That's what he
and-
said he's gonna do.
And then the board look at it, and yep, that covers it, and then it becomes part of that policy.
Correct.
That doesn't need to be a separate manual, that would be part of this
No,
policy.
that'd be part of it. Yeah, that would be in addition to the policy manual. You have a section there on it, you know.
But some of
and-
those are rather large documents that we don't want to include.
Well, they are, and it's not just manager. You know, what happens if, and this has happened to us.
Public
I mean,
Works.
Yeah, what happens if Kirk just Friday at 5:30 says, yeah, you know what? I don't want to go to any more board meetings. I'm done. See ya. Who steps up? I mean,
Or they
who-
might even say something more rude.
who
Or
jumps,
just not
you know,
show up.
who jumps in to take it over? Because by statute, you have to have a certain level of certification to be the superintendent of public works, and we don't have anybody else in the organization that has that. So it's not just the manager, that's one, but, I mean, we have to have a succession plan for superintendent of public works, fire chief. I mean, it's not necessarily the assistant chief, because right now, the assistant chief that we have has no interest whatsoever in being full-time. He can't, he has a full-time job. So, you know, how do you do that?
But in
Now,
reality, the
we-
assistant takes over if we're in different situations.
Different
In the city,
situations.
if a chief goes, then the assistant takes over
But they're full-time.
in their full-time.
Full-time
Right.
employees, you know, so we do have, right now, we have the luxury of 2 full-time staffs that, you know, can keep it running. But it needs to be more than just the manager. I mean, obviously, the you know, planning and zoning administrator, what happens if Jason gets, you know, the next governor says, I want you in my cabinet? Okay, Isaac's not gonna be ready to move up into that. He's, you know, he's green, he's fresh, you know, so how do you deal with that? What do you do? You know, so it needs to be basically just a succession plan, and it would impact these positions, you know, somehow. And the board may have to make a financial commitment to have a backup. I mean, just to have something in the wings, whether it's a retainer or it's, an agreement with with MML, where, where you have a range rider come in within a couple of days, somebody who's a retired manager, experienced manager that can be here within a couple of days and stick with you for 30, 60, 90 days until you go decide what you're doing. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that need to
But
be
right now,
part
we
of that
do have
plan.
something, because it'll go back, say if you left or something happened to you, it goes to her, to Lynn,
Mhm.
and then she's got
By
to decide how
statute.
we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I thought you were just
Are you
chilly.
telling us something?
Dwindling down.
I thought you were just chilly since the door's open.
Well, we've covered everything that I wanted to cover anyway, and we'll talk
Yeah,
about.
Well, you had 3:30 you had to leave?
I'm gonna pull the Kurt Page Friday thing that we're referring to.
Well, coming back from vacation, you're not used to this colder weather.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay, sorry. It's cooling off out there.
Yeah.
That's all right. I don't know if there's any, that's all I
But
really
that's,
wanted
we
to
have to
cover.
just keep working at it, picking away.
Motion to adjourn?
We don't even need a motion on a work session.
We just need enough people to walk.
Well, we wait long enough, everybody, well, John's up, he's ready to go.
And
No,
Dan,
I'm just kidding. Yeah, this is good.
and Dan never came back, so.
Yeah.
I didn't hear what the page was. Was that that must have been something other than a medical.
We have had a request, though, just from one person, but still, it's something to think about, having some of our work sessions at night.
At what?
At
At
night?
night.
At
So the
night?
people who are working can attend if they want to. It's a little freer now because it's on YouTube, they can watch these out of the comfort of their own home, popcorn and beer if they want, but we have had the request, so I just wanted to pass it
We
on.
were talking about having the road and rec committee in the afternoon.
Yeah. We were trying to cut back on
On
overtime. Remember that?
Well, I mean, for us, if we're doing work sessions.
I know, but we have overtime, it's comp time. Same thing.
Yeah. So, just think about it.
Am I getting off time for this?
Next time we
Yeah, you can
schedule.
hear,
Next time we schedule. Some of that has to go around Randy's schedule
Then I don't
too,
have to leave as
because.
bad as I thought.
She could walk home.
now you know how they got to $2,700.
Okay, I guess that's it. We're good. I'll give you a gavel, John, so you know.
All right.